My name is Daniel Hearn. I'm the Commodore of the Four Lakes Ice Yacht Club, and I've been asked to be the moderator for the first ever Skeeter Summit. Speaking of Deb Whitehorse, I wanted to mention, I think everybody on this call knows that Deb is truly the ice sailing information portal for the world. And this event is completely Deb's vision. It would not have happened if not for her never-ending enthusiasm and leadership for ice sailing. So this is happening only because of Deb Whitehorse. So when you see her next time, give her a pat on the back. So we have nearly 100 sailors scheduled online from around the U.S. and Canada to participate in this summit. Including a number of dignitaries that I'm assuming some of them have made it onto the call or onto the summit by now. But among those dignitaries are one living legend, Paul Kruger, who is a pioneer in the Skeeter fleet for decades. And he has countless hardware finishes to his credit. And possibly the most impressive thing about Paul is that he's an ice sailor who is still building and racing the biggest and baddest Skeeters that there are, the A-class front seater bubble boat that we'll be talking about. And he's doing it at the right young age of 80 something. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it is very, very impressive. So Paul is on the line. Also scheduled to be with us is John Eisenlohr. John is the guru of hard wing land sailors with numerous titles to his credit. He is truly a prolific innovator within the worldwide land sailing community. And among his many creations, John designed the mini Skeeter that races both in the desert and on the ice. And you will see that in the presentation this evening. The mini Skeeter class, I believe, boasts nearly 200 boats in less than a decade and has become arguably the most hotly contested land sailing class in the United States. So welcome, John. We also were scheduled to have several DN ice sailing legends. One, Jeff Kent, who is the founder of CSI Composites, which is now Moore Brothers Incorporated. Jeff is a pioneer of composite masts for the DN class and also a constant innovator, always push performance boundaries within the constraints of the class rules. And he's done so for decades and numerous innovations that are being used in the class today. He's also a champion DN ice sailor in his own right and a longtime valued member of the DN technical committee. Our other DN dignitary who is scheduled to be with us is Matt Struble. Matt is the reigning DN world champion. And in spite of the fact that Matt now lives in San Diego, he set aside the moth and his catamarans for a few months last season to show the world that he's truly still got it. In spite of his years-long cold weather layout or layoff, he came to the event and took home the world champion title. And then lastly, Steve Schalk is also scheduled to be on this call. Steve is a multi-time and the current reigning Bemke Skeeter champion, who has also served as the International Skeeter Association and Northwest Ice Yacht Association secretary and treasurer for many years. So a special welcome to those dignitaries. And we also have several attendees who are staying up quite late to plug into the summit from the Netherlands and Sweden. So a special welcome to those people as well. So once again, welcome to all. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our very distinguished group of presenters. First, I would like to introduce our elder statesman of ice sailing on the panel, Henry Bossett. Hopefully one day Henry will write a book about ice sailing, because I have no doubt that he is the world's authority on the subject. Henry is a sailmaker by trade, and Henry is a 3-time DN world champion and a 5-time North American champion. So a very accomplished ice sailor, also a very accomplished soft water sailor, but we'll stay focused on the hard water at this time. Although I should mention, Henry was also selected to represent the United States racing on the Tornado Catamaran in the 1980 Olympics. With some
Kent.
What's that?
With Jeff Kent.
With Jeff Kent. I was not aware of that. But for those of you who were around at that time, unfortunately, that didn't happen for Henry, as President Carter held back all of our athletes for that Olympics in protest of Russia's invasion of yet another country. And sadly, that sounds too familiar. Henry's technical expertise with iceboat sails is truly unsurpassed. The Bossett logo has adorned many champion sails for decades in multiple classes. And his innovation with evolving sail materials brought new levels of performance year after year. And Henry has designed and built nearly all of the fastest contemporary Skeeter sails that have ever found their way to the ice. And I can attest that his sails are outstanding and a pleasure to own. So Henry Bossett, welcome. Next, we have Pat Heppert. Pat is a guy who I'd have to describe as wicked smart, but painfully unassuming. His ice boating kit still consists of blue jeans and a Carhartt jacket. He can come up with a creative solution to any ice boat problem, but only come up with one ice boat name, Drifter. Everyone is called Drifter, and nearly all of them are green. Pat also is the undisputed champion of the Sea Skeeter class. He's dominated the class since introducing his own front seater design, which is essentially a cleverly scaled down version of the fastest ice boats on the planet. Pat had reworked nearly every detail of his original design over the years to squeeze more performance out of the boat. Many, including me, believe that Pat's design will be the long-term future of the high end of ice sailing, given that his design is approaching the performance of the much larger, much more expensive A-Skeeter. Rather fitting, really, because Pat is notoriously frugal. Some might say even cheap. I wouldn't say that though, Pat. The workmanship on Pat's boats is absolutely spectacular, though many of the materials came from the scrap heap, and I think he's just as proud of that as anything else. And there is no one in the ice sailing community more generous with his time and expertise. Pat provides amazing plans for his Sea Skeeter design to anyone for free, and they are remarkable plans. You know, even a monkey like me with limited skills can build from Pat's plans with his guidance. He offers guidance and advice to everybody, and recently he's become the most sought after PRO in the United States for his expertise and efficiency at running regattas. And he has a wealth of knowledge of everything ice boats, Skeeters, and otherwise. So he's a great person in the ice sailing community, and I'm honored to call Pat great friend. And last, Dan Clapp. Dan has won 9 ISA World Championships and a record 7 Northwest regattas. These 16 Skeeter titles together tied him with the one and only legendary Bill Matson as the winningest Skeeter sailor of all time. Dan is also credited with the design of the current A Skeeters with their canopy enclosed forward cockpits and sloping rear decks. His latest design, which was nicknamed the Fastback, won every major Skeeter regatta in the last 20 years. Today's starting line almost looks like a design class of Clapp Fastbacks. That's quite a testament to his innovation. Dan first appeared with his state-of-the-art bubble boat in 1991 at the ISA on Lake Geneva, eventually much to the displeasure of the locals here in the Midwest, as Dan put the herd on him and won every race against the 26 rear cockpit Skeeters, also referred to as rumble seaters. In all, Dan has built 10 A Skeeters, including 6 of the current Fastback design. Most of his boats were built with foam and carbon fiber, pushing the technology with each and every build. Not only were his boats crazy fast, the fit and finish made them works of art. Admiration of his Skeeter racing accomplishments may have only been surpassed by admiration of his craftsmanship. Some might say they were even too beautiful to race. Dan currently spends his time in Maine these days and is moving on and experimenting with solid wing sails on smaller ice boats. So, gentlemen, welcome on behalf of all of us. Thank you for sharing your insight and expertise. I know this will be very informative and entertaining summit. So let's formally kick things off and turn it over to our ice sailing historian, Henry Bossett. Take it away, Henry.
Actually, was Dan supposed to start it? Let's click to the next.
Henry, did I screw it up already?
Oh, you did. I did. Dan, aren't you going to
Okay.
do the first couple of slides, or?
Yeah, the first 2, I think.
Yeah, it's not a big deal.
All right, Dan, take it away. I think I lost my moderator job already. No, skip it. Go ahead to the first slide, Jerry. Thank you.
Okay. 100 years ago, all ice boats were classified by their sail area. They all steered from the stern, and since no 2 boats were identical, there was no such thing as a one design class. When Skeeters first appeared in the 1930s, they were simply Class E ice boats that steered from the front. Some people today still call modern Skeeters E Skeeters, the E coming from the 75 square feet of sail. Next. Since ice boats were derived from summer sailboats, it was only natural that they steered from the rear. But unlike sailboats, these stern steers got squirrely at high speed and often flickered or spun out, many times resulting in the occupants being ejected. To understand the physics of this, the next time you're at the market, give a shopping cart a shove across the parking lot and notice how it tracks relatively straight. Then turn the shopping cart around backwards and give it a shove. Immediately, the shopping cart will spin around and face forward. The physics of this is why all automobiles steer from the front. Next.
Okay. So as the elder statesman, I guess I'm doing the history. Hopefully I won't be too boring. And second, I'm really only catching up to many other historians out there, including Deb in particular. Every time I search for something on the web, iceboat.org would come up with a history of that or a story on that. So again, I'm certainly just catching up. At any rate, Starkey Meyer of Milwaukee experimented with moving the steering rudder to the bow. His series of Paulas proved the concept, but the size proved dangerous. Starkey's large 250 square foot Paula unshipped her mast in a race in 1933 and almost crushed him. In spite of that, some large bow steerers continued to be built, such as the Marcia II, which eventually broke her backbone. This led to the development of the very fast, yet safer and smaller 75 square foot models pioneered by the Joyce brothers of Milwaukee and refined by Walter Beauvais of Fontana on Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, with his bow Skeeters. There were actually several bow Skeeters built before Beauvais. Pictures from 1901 show a crude attempt at Red Bank, New Jersey. Here we see a picture of Starkey Meyer's B-boat Paula on the left. They called them freak boats at the time, and his first Paula was the first bow steerer in the country, other than not so fast ones. The Marcia II, a 350 square foot boat that existed in 1941-ish, circa, was the largest bow steerer in the country. She was 40 foot by 24 feet. Next. This is the Eva III, which was originally Starkey Meyer's Paula III. It was defeated in 1942 by Miss Jane II, a typical Western stern steer. So again, even though the bow steerers were so fast, etc., there was still plenty of room for a good Western stern steer to get out there and beat them. The concept that bigger is better kept large bow steerer promoters believing they could still beat those pesky little boats, but they regularly lost in free-for-all contests by the late 30s. Notable with Eva 3 here on the left is, other than her history, is the cockpit to sit upright in, or mostly upright in, and the wide tiller and the sheet winch and cleats. Next. In October 1932, Popular Mechanics actually published a picture of the bow Skeeter, and they said it was a rudder in front boat designed and built by Walter Beauvais. The idea was to have a boat that was safer on the ice. To the right, we have a actual plan of it to scale, classy bow Skeeter from wings on the ice, which has amazing info and pictures of various boats in the around the 35, 38 range. It was published in 38, but had pictures before that. The December 1932 issue of the Lake Geneva Regional News stated that Palmer Boat Company's new type ice boat may revolutionize ice sailing. It is on the ice at Fontana. In addition, in the 1933 February 24th Wisconsin State Journal, they reported Roger Joyce and William Meyer, both of Pewaukee, shared the honors in the new E, or Mosquito class. The Skeeter is so named because its small size and the original hull shape looked like a mosquito. Next. So this is an original bow Skeeter from 1932 that's still on the ice today, or in theory will be again. It was set up here on the land at the Delavan swap meet just last month. It was built by Beauvais and Harry Melgus. He was part of the company at the time in 1932-33. Now this is Buddy's dad, Harry Melgus. Harry won the 1935 NIYA in her, and there's a picture of Harry Melgus in another Skeeter a little bit later in 1936 with a big smile on his face. Must have just come in from sailing around the ice. Next. The Bow Skeeter Club of Southern Wisconsin was formed in February of 1933. A 1934 Janesville Gazette said the Beauvais Company would build 75 Bow Skeeters this year. By 1935-36, the Skeeter Ice Boat Club had a fleet of 60 ice boats. That picture there, of course, shows how prevalent the Bow Skeeter style was. There's only 2 boats, taller rigs, that really aren't a Bow Skeeter style. Below that, you can see that they actually raced them. It was a 2-seater, side by side, and they did race them 2-seater as well as single-seater. There they are in January of 1936 at Max and Cookie, Indiana. And next. So here we have the Palmer Ice Boat Company, a famous company also, but that didn't last all that long. In 1932, Walter Beauvais was president of the Palmer Boat Company when they started building his bow Skeeter, but they developed their own line of Skeeters when he left in 1934. There's a beautiful boat, early Palmer, on display at Pioneer Village Museum in Minden, Nebraska here. Apparently it's been there on display for 50 or 60 years. They advertised in the brochure two models, streamlined side by side and a Palmer Hornet. The left-hand or middle boat is a typical bow Skeeter produced by them, and the boat on the right, I would guess, is either the Streamline or the Palmer Hornet. It was not an amicable separation, as Walter was charged with stealing boat forms and lumber. He was eventually cleared. He had a reason for doing it. They owed him money, and apparently they weren't paying him, so he just went on in and got his forms. For a time, Palmer designs competed well against the Mead designs, to be described shortly. But by 1938, they discontinued iceboats and returned to their core business of just building inland lake scows. Next. Over in Madison, Wisconsin, they followed a different path that was influenced by the European monotype and thus called a German type. It was still a two-seater, but in tandem, allowing a narrower hull with potentially less drag. Per Ray Ruge, a historian back in the day, for several years, the Germans had been using a highly efficient cat rig combined with a box-like fuselage in which the crew rode sitting up. German-American Starkey Meyer took those concepts, but moved the steering to the front to solve the flickering problem of stern steers. So on the left, Carl Bernard actually built a C-class bow steerer by the sail area rule, the NIYA rules, in 1933. In 1935, he finally built an E-class 75 square foot boat and called it the Dutchman. Down at the lower left is the Dutchman on the ice in 1955. Perhaps Deb knows where that is now and if it ever shows up on the ice still. Over on the right in the top, we have that European monotype. And as you can see, it's a really efficient boat. It's a box-like hull that you can sit in, sitting up. The crew actually sat facing aft doing the sheeting, and so didn't have a very good view of the boating, but the mast was rotating. It was raked back. It was a triangular shape, and there was no jib in particular. The jib really messed up the wind over the main, trying to get the two to, fit together and be the same shape, not too full one, not too flat the other. So in the bottom right, Carl Bernard drew up plans of a German type ice boat, says drawn by Carl H. Bernard, called the Dutchman, and he called it the German type boat. Again, I believe it totally came from the European monotype style of rig, because there's no record that I know of bow steerers at that time on the ice, and the European monotype still continues. Now, perhaps since we have a couple of Europeans over there, if they've ever seen pictures or an actual boat, please let us know, but I haven't. Next. So Ted Mead, a Princeton grad, is arguably the most influential figure in promoting ice sailing to the public through his Mead Glider company. In 1933, he actually placed a small ad for ice boats in addition to his Mead gliders. And in the bottom, just two photos of him in his Minx 2. He started the company in the early 30s, producing gliders and kayaks. He belonged to the Fox Lake, Illinois Ice Boat Club and took an interest in improving ice boats. He argued that if he could devise skis for them, he'd be doing something really important. Of course, there isn't an ice boater today who doesn't say the same thing. Every time we show up at a lake and there's a couple of inches of snow there, we're like, oh man, where are the snow runners? The real snow runners, the ski ones. At any rate, he was Fox Lake champion in 1936 in Minx 1 and defended with Minx 2 in 1936. Next. So here in February 1935 in Popular Mechanics, he finally published his Batwing boat. That was his first product. It had a steering wheel and it was a two-seater, side by side, I guess you'd call it. And in the bottom two pictures are Tom Halsey's restoration out on Long Island that he did a few years back. The pictures are a restoration by Tom Halsey, whose family history of ice boating dates back to the 1850s. I'm sorry, I wanted to get that in. The next. So he kept moving along, and in 1936, he finally advertised his Skeeter type model. It read, "Enjoy Old Man Winter in a Mead ice yacht, Skeeter or Batwing, available in kit or factory built." A Mead Glider's nameplate is shown on the right on a vintage Mead Skeeter. Next. And finally, he put a real brochure out, pretty much based on the 1938 NIYA when Harry Nye was first. He advertised both single and two-seat models. They were both 18-foot models. The single-seater had a 13-foot plank and the two-seater had an 11-foot. He also had a 16-foot home build kit sport model that seats two. And again, you could build them complete or in kit form. Next. So in 1938, Look magazine ran one of the first photo feature stories on ice boating. They called it the winter's fastest sport. And to the left, they caught Harry Melgus, Buddy's dad, on Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And they said, the state that leads the world in ice yachting. Apparently, the Skeeter Ice Boat Club picked up on that, and they called Geneva the ice boating capital of the world, although many would beg to differ from other clubs out there. Below, of course, they had to include this spill on Lake Hopatcong, New Jersey is a typical ice boat mishap. And of course, that's a stern steerer, and that's what we were trying to get away from. Next. So in 1942, Al Red Bryan designed the tumbleweed class. This is somewhat important because he belonged to the Connecticut Ice Boat Club and tested his designs on Banham Lake. But he eventually ended up being part of, well, he was part of Alcort at that time, and went on to Sunfish and Sailfish fame. He was the co-founder, along with Cortland Henniger, of Alcort, famous later for the Sailfish and Sunfish. First, they dabbled in ice boats, producing the tumbleweed. In 1946, they sent out the brochure to gauge interest for their Skeeters. They received little interest and put a bigger effort into developing the Sailfish. Al, in particular, still loved designing ice boats, and in 1947, they prototyped a two-seater that became the first low-rig Eastern Yankee. Next. So this 1942 Forerunner ice boater was preceded by a Ben Lampert design from Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He raced in the 1938 Northwest Championship. Harry Melgus, Buddy's dad, also raced his own design in the 1949 ISA, but none were successful. There were actually several other attempts in the West at Forerunner boats in an attempt to make ice boating even safer from capsizes and spinouts. In fact, in 1856, the North Shrewsbury Ice Boat and Yacht Club had a Forerunner boat per Nathan Cook, and others at that club followed it. It's interesting to note that Forerunner boats weren't just both planks turning or both sets of runners. Some were front steerers and some were aft steerers, and perhaps there was a double in between there. Next. So the first Skeeters didn't have springboards. So you see these are boats from Toronto, and the boat in the back and the front is a original type Skeeter with no springboard. The one in the back was developed by Gordon Reed of Toronto. He decided you should have a springboard to smooth the ride out there, and he attached it further back underneath the bow. And then finally, they moved on to what we have today in the middle there, which is the plank attached fully to the bow as a springboard. Next. News articles and results show an active group of women skippers in Bow Skeeters at first, but continuing into the Palmer and Mead Skeeters. On the left, we have Jane Peggle, circa 1950. There's actually a Skeeter Women's World Championship trophy no longer competed for. It was last won by Jane Peggle. Below, the photo below was titled Icebirds by the Detroit Times. It's 3 different two-seaters with female crews. This was shot on Lake St. Clair in 1946. So on the left, you've got a cockpit in front of the mast. In the middle, you got essentially a side-by-side. And then on the right, you've got the cockpit, the extra cockpit behind the mast. So many variations were tried, and women were quite out there ice boating quite a lot. Next. Here's the video clip from short video of the 1949 ISA on Fox Lake. That's Harry Melgus's concept of a Forerunner boat. Quite interesting in that he stuck a springboard out the back and put the runner back there. He obviously felt that that was a better concept than the other square type ones, but just like the other experiments, nothing came of it. He did not finish well at that regatta, and he may have even broken down. Next. So Skip Austin and his Skeeter named Pink Pink in 1954. The Skeeter class simply requires a sail of less than 75 square feet. This beautiful little Skeeter qualifies, although they likely did not let him line up with the big boys. So now we get into the actual development today with Dan or Pat.
Well, thanks, Henry. So if we go to the next slide. So the overall theme here, as you see the years go on, is bigger, taller, faster. And so the excerpt on the left is out of a 1960s book by S. Calhoun Smith with the side-by-side comparison of the 30s bow Skeeter to modern Skeeter of the 1960s. And so taller, if you're going to go taller, it's going to get wider. If it's going to get wider, it's going to get longer. And so the concept is bigger, 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 and aspect ratio keeps going up. So taller mast, but shorter foot on the sail. In order to get the center of effort in the right spot, you can also see that the rake of the mast starts increasing, and they're leaning way back. So what would be really interesting is to have the same picture and put a modern Class A bubble boat on there. It's even taller and longer and wider yet. So that's the basic history of the development. Next. So a lot of innovation in the Skeeter class. This boat was sailed by Buddy. This one you can see has a very distinctive hull shape that's like a pumpkin seed of a cross section. And this was actually wind tunnel tested MIT. So the concept of sticking just mass amounts of development and hours and thought is nothing new for the Skeeter class. It's been a passion for many people for 100 years. What's interesting to note about the pumpkin seed cross section is that this is a hull cross section that's actually still immensely popular in land sailing with rumble seaters. And their thought on this is that the pumpkin seed cross section is aerodynamically more friendly to the apparent wind, because the apparent wind is not straight on where they're designed to be slender, but the apparent wind is also traveling across the hull from left to right. So the pumpkin seat is slightly more friendly to that. So fascinating. If we go to the next slide, the great thing about the Skeeter class is it's very open with very few rules, and it allows for an immense amount of creativity. And if you have an idea, let's go out and try it. So here's an example of a metal framed hull, and that's one person's version of we think this is going to be great. An immense amount of drag with an open structure like this, but the creativity and the work that goes into trying something new is just absolutely tremendous. Next. So what is a Skeeter ice boat? Well, all three of the ice boats in this picture are Skeeter ice boats. In the background, we'll see a Bemke B Skeeter side by side with the pilot sitting under the boom. On the left, we see a Class A rumble seat Skeeter. And then on the right, we see a Class A bubble boat front cockpit. So they're all Skeeters. And that's the great thing about the class, is that it's an open class with very, very, very few rules that fit on a note card. And it allows for the continual development and innovation, almost unrestricted, with a few restrictions to keep things in check, so they don't diverge in too many different directions too quickly. But the innovation is not limited at all. So that's the one thing about the Skeeter class, is that compared to all other classes, which are either development classes or one design classes, the Skeeter class is truly open. So all these boats are competitive, and just everybody's vision is a little different, and it's going to grow over time. But as it grows over time, if we can go to the next slide, there becomes a problem where boats get passed up by faster and faster boats and more diverging designs. And eventually it doesn't end up in a great competition, encouraging different designs to compete on the same course, no longer competitive. And at a certain point, it becomes no longer safe with different speeds and sailing angles. And so what was originally known as the Class E Skeeter has been subdivided into Class A, B, and C as of today. So the Class A Skeeter, that's your traditional unlimited class. And when we say unlimited, it's unlimited, 75 square feet and whatever you want to do with it. Over the years, to somewhat keep it under control, eventually there were, as rigs got taller and taller and taller, from 18 foot, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, and then a couple of them even taller. Eventually, a limit was put at 28 foot for the masts. And originally limited to 75 square feet or less. Eventually a minimum was put on that as 65 square foot. The Class B Skeeter broke off, formed in 1965. And that is basically as modern Skeeters were in 1965. So it's a traditional under the boom boat, high rake rig, and it sails by the same sail area, 65 to 75 square feet. And the one distinguishing feature is the under the boom side-by-side cockpit. So so two people can go on the boat for recreational cruising. And fantastic race boats, and they're still very active today. And if you haven't been in a B Skeeter, you're like, wow, it's been 20 years since I've been in a boat like that. Go take a ride in one. I call it classic iceboat racing. There's just nothing like remembering that feeling of being in a under the boom Skeeter. Eventually there was a movement for, well, now we've got a whole bunch of boats that aren't competitive with 24-foot masts and above, and still want to come out and race. And so under much heated debate, eventually a Class C was formed, 1970, first ISA 71 with that class competing. And it's the exact same maximum 75 square feet. So same thing, 75 square feet, whatever you want to do with it. The one additional requirement of the Class C Skeeter is what's called the low rig, or the 20-foot mast. And what's unique about that is with the 20-foot mast, really boxes in the boat where it only needs to be 16, 17 feet wide maximum, and 20 to 24 foot long maximum. So it really boxes in the boat for something that's transportable and lighter. And eventually a minimum square footage was put on that as well. And it's changed a little bit, but it's currently at 40 square foot minimum. So that's the divergence in design. So next. But further divergence is, over time, there were competitive Skeeters that broke off and formed their own one design class. The Renegade, designed by Elmer Millenbach, Mr. Iceboat, designed in the 1940s and won the Class E trophy easily several times. So this was the fast boat of the day. This was the fastest Class E Skeeter of the day. And the boat is fully documented on plans. And as Skeeters continue to develop above and beyond this with taller rigs and higher aspect ratios, a lot of people recognize that this is a tremendous boat and start sailing them as one designs. It's still sailed today, one of the largest one design fleets that's raced today. Fantastic boats, and backed up by Elmer for many years. Just absolutely fantastic ride, very competitive, one design fleet. And they're also, for a bunch of years, they would put 20-foot rigs on them and race them as the Class C Skeeter. So fantastic one design boat. And next. So what inspired Elmer to do this? So if you look at the DNs of the day, they weren't regulated nearly as what they are today. And what was considered a DN was drastically divergent of boats that really weren't very similar. So it's a question, Elmer, of, you know, what do you want to do? Do you want to try to sail a DN and guess what that is, or go the unlimited route? And the divergence in the design of the DN class is really what drove them to go a different direction, go the unlimited route, which is what led to the development of the Renegade. Next, another picture of Elmer with Renegade 3. Fantastic picture. And the Skeeters of the day could be easily loaded onto the top of a car, as you see there. And the other great thing about the Renegade is just the sheer quality of the plans and how that was backed up by Elmer. Every set of plans at one point came along with a free mast step extrusion and the mast ball to get the builder started in the right direction. So there's not a lot of people who've contributed much to the sport as Elmer. Next. In the East, one design class formed as the Yankees, and it's a one design hull. They can compete in the Class B side by side ISA today, and very quick boats. There's a lot of them out there in the East, especially. I just sailed one last weekend, so again, if you haven't been in a classic ice boat for a long time, it's worth getting back in. Next, comparison of the Eastern Yankee design to the Western Bemke B Skeeter. Both somewhat similar mast heights and similar sized. Again, both able to sail in the B Skeeter fleet, but both also have their own one design rules if they wanted to sail in that manner. But as of today, they're both capable of sailing in the B Skeeter fleet, the ISA. And not many of these boats really ever evaporate. They're so classic and so sought after that they have maintained their values since the 60s. So that's the testament to the design. Next. The Knight, another one design boat that's factory built by S&R Marine in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. Developed in the 1960s. There's been over 600 of these built to date. And they're fiberglass hulls, very strict one design regulations. They sailed as a Class C Skeeter for a bunch of years, and now still sail in the ISA as a Knight one design ISA class, side by side. And again, have done a great job of preserving the class and preserving the boats. Next. The Aero class, another factory built fiberglass boat, raced in as a fleet in limited sizes, not at the ISA, but another example of a one design boat that has garnered a lot of attraction to a lot of people over the years. A lot of people got started in ice boating with an Aero, and again, they're still one of the most fun rides you can have today is go take an Aero out, which is why they're still popular. Next. The Whiz was actually originally a catalog plan from the 1930s and typical of performance of ice boats in the 1930s, and kind of fell by the wayside. You wouldn't see a Whiz around ever. And then resurrected by Bill Buchholz in Maine, pulled out the catalog plans, and the hull is basically per the catalog plan, but with a modern rig on them now, and they've become very popular little boats. You haven't seen any at the ISA Regatta, but they fit in the Class C Skeeter fleet. Next. The one that hasn't quite made it to ISA status yet is the Mini Skeeter, which is a one design boat developed by John Eisenlohr. Didn't intend on building a boat that was going to evolve into a massive fleet, but certainly accomplished that. A lot of people recognize that this is just a fantastic little woodworking project, and what this class attracts is actually the woodworker, the home hobbyist. And we can't ignore this trend. in the last 5 years, there's been 150 of these things built. More home built mini Skeeters than any other class of boat out there that are self-built by the owner. So not raced today on the ice. They're raced very competitively in the desert, and the fleet is growing and growing and growing to a larger size. And eventually they'll find a home on the ice, racing in fleets. So this is the trend to watch out for, because everybody that sees them, everybody that sails them is just incredibly impressed. So this is a trend to watch in the future. Next, we're going to talk about modern bubble boat design with Dan Clapp.
Okay. Today's Skeeter is a forward cockpit design that distributes the pilot's weight evenly among the three skates. The cockpit is covered with a canopy and the rear deck slopes downward. This design was not the concept of a nautical engineer, nor is it the result of computer simulations. Today's design is the result of trial and error. Decades of consistent incremental changes from many individuals that built on the success of each other. It's hard to imagine a future design that could be more aerodynamic. I'd like to thank John Bobnowski for putting this design to paper. This was drawn in the late 1990s, actually. Next. Like all high-performance racing machines, they're always fastest right before they break. It's a risk the racer accepts, knowing that if you overbuild it, it won't be competitive. How else are we supposed to try our ideas without putting them to the test? Next. This was the boat to beat in the 1950s. Jack Ripp from Madison, Wisconsin, won 5 Northwest regattas with his red boat. It was not a radical departure from the fast Skeeters of the day. Rather, it was the natural evolution of the design. New sail materials were becoming available, and Ripp figured out that these new generation sails could be made taller than those of the past. Miss Fortune's 23-foot tall mast was nearly a foot taller than the other rigs on the lake. Jack later switched to racing the Renegade class and had great success there as well. Next. This is my father, Dave Clapp, in 1972. By this time, the masts had grown to 24 feet 6 inches, but the cockpits were still located under the boom. Heavily influenced by his occupation as an airline pilot, my dad built his boat to be as streamlined as possible, including ailerons on the runner plank, controlled with tow pedals to bring the boat down from a height without having to ease the main sheet. Destiny was one of the fastest conventional cockpit Skeeters of all time. Although she never won the ISA, she did win every Eastern regatta multiple times and several races in the ISA before suffering an unfortunate breakdown. Next. As the sail materials continued to improve, the Skeeter rigs continued to get taller. As they grew taller, the foot of the sails got shorter to keep the sail within class limits. Also, the rake of the mast decreased, so the leach of the sails would stay almost vertical. This is something Henry will talk about later. Next. This is the first Eastern boat to win the ISA. Until then, the Skeeter class was dominated by the sailors and boats of the Midwest. In 1975, for the first time ever, the ISA was held in the Eastern region on Lake Saratoga in New York. Historically, the Western boats were built for high winds, and the Eastern boats were built for light winds, the winds predominant to each region. As luck would have it, the regatta was a light air event. The first 4 places overall were taken by Eastern boats, thereby stunning the Western delegation. This was the ISA champion, John Knuth of New Jersey, who had borrowed this sail the day of the regatta from Tom Nichols. Tom, unfortunately, was second overall and had to live with that decision for 30 years until 2005, when Tom himself won the ISA. And to prove his victory wasn't a fluke, Tom went on to win the ISA again the following year. Next. This is another square hulled Skeeter. Unlike the expensive foam and carbon fiber Skeeters of today, the materials for these square boats were mostly sourced from junkyards. Ed Knuth, father of recent ISA champion John Knuth, was the brains behind the Square team with their ultra-wide masts and self-aligning runners. This was the mid-70s when the aft cockpit boats were just beginning. The ultra-high proficiency of pulling the sail down to the deck was not without its consequences. By moving the skipper behind the runner plank, weight was taking off the front runner. This made steering these boats around the leeward mark dangerous. Many boats used weight affixed to the front runner. Here in this photo, the Square team tries an airfoil to create down pressure. Next. My father's boat, Destiny, remained competitive for a while by putting winglets on the boom in an attempt to accomplish the same end plate effect that bringing the boom down to the deck does. Destiny's last moment of glory as the last competitive conventional Skeeter was when my brother Dave sailed her to a third place overall finish at the 1980 ISA behind rear cockpit legends Bill Matson and Paul Kruger. Next. The aft cockpit design became known as the rumble seater because the ride behind the plank as the boat slid sideways around the leeward mark was enough to loosen teeth fillings. However, the ride around the windward mark was epic, as shown here by 1988 ISA champion Ken Kreider in his Skeeter named Poon. Ken was more famous for wearing his pink tuxedo to the banquet each year. Next. This is legendary Native American skipper Ken Whitehorse in his boat Warrior. By pulling the boom down to the deck, the high pressure air on the windward side of the sail can't escape under the boom to the low pressure side, as it did in the conventional Skeeters where the pilot sat under the boom. By closing the gap, the rigs became more efficient. Next. Madison's Paul Kruger was the creator of the rumble seater. His new boat won both the ISA and the Northwest Regatta in 1979. And in the 80s, starting lines were filled with yachts of his design. They went on to win every major regatta for more than a decade. Paul is best known as the Secretary-Treasurer of the International Skeeter Association, a position he held for nearly half a century. Here, this photo shows the evolution of Paul's boats, including his 12th boat, Ramblin' 12, which he still races today, well into his 80s. Next. Tom Nichols of New Jersey chose to close the gap by moving the cockpit forward instead of aft. By doing so, he eliminated the problem of steering inherent in the rumble seaters. With this boat, a sea Skeeter, Tom proved the concept of the front cockpit. In the right conditions, Tom was able to beat most A Skeeters of the time. And in 1990, Tom finally convinced me to build an A Skeeter with a forward cockpit, which I debuted at the 1991 ISA. Next. Tom was not the first to build a forward cockpit Skeeter. This radical Skeeter was designed and built by Harry Whitehorse, the late husband of our beloved Deb Whitehorse. Besides its unique cockpit placement, this boat sported a steering wheel and foot sheeting. Unlike most boats at the time that were built of wood, this boat was made of aluminum. Unfortunately, this boat was only sailed once and didn't have the chance to prove its possibilities. Next. These three men were the brain trust of the Skeeter class during the 1960s and 70s. With 24 Skeeter titles between them, it's hard to argue their legendary status in the class. At the time, it was not unusual to have 50 boats competing. More important than their victories is their contribution to the class in the workshop. Between them, they built dozens of iceboats of all kinds. They were always willing to help any competitor without regard to their own lost advantage. Next. Bill Matson is an icon. He is unanimously considered the father of the A Skeeter class. Bill has won the ISA Skeeter Championship more than anyone else, an astounding 11 times. He was the builder of the boats of iceboat champions such as Buddy Melgis, Peter Harkin, and Tom Hislop. Here, Bill stands in front of a fleet of Skeeters, all built by him. No one has contributed more to the development and building of Skeeter iceboats than Bill. A meticulous craftsman, Bill was incredibly generous with his knowledge and expertise. I was blessed with his generosity in 2001 when he offered up the use of his shop and materials one night to repair my broken mast on the first day of the regatta, despite him being my competitor. The next day, I was then able to go out and win every race with my repaired mast. Next. Bill was a charming, charismatic, and entertaining speaker. When others were complaining about the conditions, like the wind, Bill would say in a matter-of-fact way, "There's nothing fickler than the wind." Next. Okay, so we've closed the gap under the booms, and the Skeeters have gotten faster as a result. But what next? What's the next giant step in Skeeter design? The answer is aerodynamics. How do we reduce drag? And what is the most drag on a Skeeter? This photo of Renegades clearly illustrates the magnitude of the drag caused by the skipper's body. Next. In 1991, I showed up at the ISA in Lake Geneva in Wisconsin with a forward cockpit canopy enclosed boat they dubbed the Bubble Boat. This photo only shows half the fleet, or the odd number side of the starting line. 27 boats in all, 26 rumble seaters, and me. After the regatta, Buddy Mel just came up to me and said, "I can't ever remember anyone ever winning every single lap of every single race in a regatta." This is one of my all-time favorite photos. Not only does it mark the beginning of my racing success, but it also shows, lined up next to me, competitors I came to respect, including Bill Matson in the red boat, Bob Caw, and Buddy Melges. Next. The following year, I showed up with a new boat, the pink boat. I fully expected every one of my competitors to have new bubble boats, but none did. They simply ordered new sails from my sailmaker, Henry Bossett, and thought that alone would make them competitive. Surprisingly, it would take nearly a decade of the pink boat dominating the circuit before the Madison Boat Shop started building front seaters. Next. By the early 2000s, the entire fleet was converted. Not only did this design prove superior, but there were other benefits as well. No wind chill, unobstructed visibility, reliable steering, even distribution of the pilot's weight, a natural roll bar, and best of all, you could sit in the boat between races and be warmed by the sun. Next. You can play that video. Yeah. The modern A-Skeeter is by far the fastest class of ice boat in the world and the easiest ice boat in the world to sail. Literally, it's like sitting in a recliner and watching TV. The boat is not jumpy, and it gives you ample notice before it hikes. It's most efficient in light wind, where it has been clocked going 10 times the speed of the wind. These fastback Skeeters are the safest Skeeters ever built. Next. The mast changed from wood to foam and carbon fiber in the 90s. This change tripled the flexibility compared to a wood mast and cut the weight in half. The weight reduction allowed some of us to try taller rigs. While most masts were 26 feet, some skippers went to 28 feet. Next. One even went so far as making the mast 30 feet tall, as shown here. And although this mast dominated in lighter wind, it made heavy wind more challenging. Ultimately, the class decided to limit the mast heights to 28 feet 6 inches. Next. The masts and many runner planks are constructed of 6-pound density urethane foam covered in carbon fiber. The typical 28-foot tall mast is 2¼ inches thick, 12 inches wide, and weighs 70 pounds. With 200 pounds, the mast generally deflect 9 to 10 inches, some even more. The aluminum tube in the photo is for the internal halyard. The sail track is a fiberglass tube with an inside diameter of 1/4 inch. The small diameter sail track makes the transition of the wind from the mast to the sail as smooth as possible. Next. The DNs were just ahead of us in mast flexibility. They were the first to prove its potential. And in fact, the Skeeter class owes a lot to the DN class for not only the mast flexibility, but also for runner technology. Next. Here on the left is one of the first of 8 carbon fiber masts built by Tom Nichols in 1988 in New Jersey for the Eastern Skeeters. Remarkably, only one of the 8 broke. Having no point of reference, it was terrifying for the pilot to see his mast bend like this when he was accustomed to stiff wood masts. The photo on the right is simply a fat guy on a blustery day ruining a kid's ice boat. Next.
Okay, and here we'll see a picture of the internal main sheet inside of Insanity. And I took this picture because I took more pictures of the inside of the boat than the outside. The craftsmanship is just unbelievable. So the current A-Skeeter fleet all runs internal main sheet. So you've got a single line going to the boom. And with advances in line technology, there's that 1/4-inch line is certainly plenty strong enough. And you can see the internal block train. This one's 7-to-1. And if you take that 7-to-1 and then you put it around a winch that's got a mechanical advantage of another 7-to-1, that's a total of 49-to-1. Then you 2-speed winch, it's double that. And so the sheeting power is truly unlimited, and we can pull the mast in half like nothing. So we have all the main sheet very clearly marked of where full trim is, and then a little bit past that is where we're going to go when you're being beat, and then a little bit past that is where we're really going to go when you need just a little more. So the sheeting power is truly unlimited. And most of these systems today have been replaced with a cascade system, same ratio, just less number of blocks to achieve the same ratio. So they're a little smoother running. The single line to the boom is also really much easier to disconnect from the boom. Just one little pin, pull that out, and your main sheet is disconnected for parking. But there's an immense amount of force that goes down to the block that you can see all the way at the back of the hull, firmly anchored into the structure with aluminum and carbon and all sorts of stuff. Next. There's all sorts of ideas in the Skeeter class. Again, it's only limited by the pilot's creativity. And so we've noticed about sheeting systems is just that last couple inches of travel, that main sheet makes a whole lot of difference. And what happens if I can pull that main sheet in just 1 inch more, and you'll notice the boat hike up and pick up speed and head up. And well, what are we really doing when we get the main sheet that tight? Well, you're pulling the leech straight, you're affecting the mast bend, so you're taking your entire airfoil shape of your mast and sail and turning it more into the wind. Well, if a little bit is good, maybe a little more is better. So what happens if we take the tail end of the boom and pull it just a little bit windward? So take that whole airfoil and rotate it just a little more. And so this is an effort to get there, and it makes the boat 10 times more complicated and not any faster. Or maybe a little, pick up a little on certain conditions going upwind, but certainly not revolutionary, and makes the boat a whole heck of a lot more complicated. So the windward traveler trying to pull it up towards windward is probably not the answer. The only advantage to this is if the course gets a little bit crooked. The Skeeters are so efficient and our angles are so tight that if that course is just a little bit crooked, you can come around that windward mark, keep turning and turning and turning, and pretty soon you're staring at the leeward mark and going, uh-oh, what am I going to do when I get there? And these boats won't hold a reach. And that's one thing with the windward, with the traveler, is if you end up in that situation, you can hold a reach, just pay it down a little bit. But overall, not the direction to go. I can confirm that. You know, you only have to build an entire boat to learn that answer. Next. And the other concept with ice boats is that, bigger sail is not always better. We don't need a full 75 square feet under a lot of conditions. And windsurfers will attest to that sometimes smaller is faster. So on a high wind or low friction day, you can see how small these sails get. They taper to nothing at the head and just a tiny, tiny little foot on them. And so sometimes smaller is faster. That big flag is not always what we need. Next. So speaking of sail measurement, we call it 75 square feet, but how many square feet is it really? It's definitely not 75 square feet. The ISA measuring method has a prescribed formula to achieve what we'll call 75 square feet, but that doesn't include the roach. So it doesn't include a lot of area of the sail. So 75 square foot sail with a big head and a maximum roach, you can get close to 100 square feet. That also does not include the mast and the boom. And so 12 inch wide mast, 28 foot long, there's another 28 square feet of area. And you see how tall the booms are, it's even more area. So we actually do have a whole nother rule for the Skeeters, that the entire rig comprised of the sail, mast, and boom laid down on the ice has to fit within a trapezoid, and that trapezoid has to be less than 140 square feet. So although we call it 75 square feet, it's not really. So, and next slide, we'll pass it over to Henry and start talking about sail design.
So sail design starts with a flat triangle sized to match the mast and boom lengths, and a leach dimension to match the sailing boom angle based on the rake and deck angle. To arrive at the sailing shape, extra cloth is added along the luff, taking into account any expected mast bend, including side bend when the mast is rotated, and along the foot and along the seams, broad seaming. Battens can affect the draft, location, and depth, but much less so with laminated materials than Dacron sails. They were originally ash, which took a skilled craftsman or sailor to taper properly. Those often warped and were difficult to duplicate. Now we use carbon foam laminates. You can measure the stiffness and draft location of battens by pushing on them or pulling down on a scale. Actually, when you have battens like the one on the lower left there under deflection testing that are so flexible at the tip to blend into the mast well, it does mess up poundage a little bit, make it more difficult to compare because that bends so quickly up front. But essentially with a batten that maybe has its maximum shape back at depth back at 35% or so, when you push down on it with a scale, it'll start to bend, and then it'll hit a maximum poundage of 6 pounds, 8, 9, 10 pounds, let's say, and it can continue to bend past that as you pull down, but the scale will not read higher. So as soon as you hit the max, which is when it kind of just flexes out a bit, you can tell that I've got a 6 pound batten, and you can push it as much as you want. It's not going to do anything different unless it's just some incredibly stiff object that doesn't really function as a batten. It's just trying to flatten a sail that's too full. So we have, I have over time come up with shapes that are a combination again of internal shaping and edge shaping that have proved successful on Skeeters. The first Skeeter sail that I made for Dan, that's on the front of Wooden Boat magazine, actually. I think Peter Harkin maybe is behind him, and he's out front, and his sail is just bending tremendously around the mast because it has so much luff curve in it. And meanwhile, Peter's looks like the perfect shape because it's just coming right off the mast. Well, in theory, that was a bit too much luff curve, but Dan also won the regatta with it. And so I then started working harder to decide just what needed to be put into the sails. Pretty much kept with the same internal shaping, airfoil shape, but tried to fit onto the mast better, depending upon how they were bending. And of course, as Dan said, essentially they're getting a bit more bend now over time than they did originally. Next. So batten pockets can also contribute to sail shape and or reducing sail shape changes from stretch under load meaning that on the left, the upper left there, is actually a Dacron laminate sail with a Dacron pocket on it. You can imagine that the Dacron is stretchy, and so when you're on starboard tack and that Dacron is on the leeward side of the sail, it's actually going to stretch out further than when you flip over to port tack and it's laying against all that good cloth. So we decided to go to carbon Kevlar structural pockets. So you see there that you've got a vertical layout of carbon Kevlar for the sail itself, and on top of it, there's a carbon Kevlar pocket going across the sail, similar to what you see on bridges, with a truss type system, and that actually helps keep the sail from stretching too much and getting fuller. Over on the right, this idea came from Tom Nichols. He wanted to put battens on each side of the sail under the concept that with it on one side of the sail, it was kind of still going to be maybe an asymmetrical sail as you went from port to starboard. And so this was an attempt to solve that. Not sure I did any double pockets on anybody else's sails. Next. So sail material advances allowed for rigs to be pushed taller. As Dan said, originally there were people who wanted to push taller with mass, but the sailcloth didn't keep up with it, and so the top of the sails didn't provide any real aerodynamic advantage. They kind of just sort of flagged around, were wrinkly, and so they had to keep the mast at a certain height that the sailcloth could handle. Luckily, we've had better materials come along, and now the masts were able to be pushed further up till they were actually, as Dan said, limited in the height to keep the arms race, so to speak, down. In addition, the free roach area mentioned, it's essentially you get 12 inches of roach when you go from a straight line from the headboard hole down to the aft edge of the sail at the inside the luff tape, the luff rope at the clew, and then you can go a maximum of 12 inches out from there. So we've initially nobody thought you should or could push out the headboard like that, but we convinced them that that was all part of the roach also, and so we ended up with essentially 12-inch headboards, but then we slowly got rid of all the extra 12-inch further way down, and so now we pretty much start at the clew and head almost straight up to the aft edge of whatever headboard we're using. If you don't do that, especially down low, the lower roach tends to hook in and create drag. So I guess maybe similar to a sailplane, we pretty much have a really narrow triangle starting right from the clew and heading up, and we don't try to add anything behind that. Next. So have fun with this graph. This basically shows at the bottom a chart of sail material types and their properties to help determine the best material based on use. Cost drives many of the decisions. Carbon has the best properties for racing and tall rigs, but is the priciest. So a sailor just out for fun can give up some performance to pay less and probably get more life in the sail. The properties that we look at are, starting at the top, are modulus, which is essentially resistance to stretch, tenacity, which is essentially breaking strength, and then UV resistance, flex resistance, so it doesn't break down when you, let's say you don't roll it all the time when it gets folded, and cost. And you can see carbon is right there as the first thing on almost every line, because carbon's the most expensive. It has bad flex resistance. It's great in UV resistance, tenacity, and modulus. The least expensive is Dacron thread. So we started with Dacron sails after we got out of Egyptian cotton and nylon and rayon, I guess. It's woven from thread to varying weights and to different stretches and finishes. After that, we came up with using Mylar, which is essentially an extruded sheet of Dacron, still Dacron material, but extruded into a thin sheet. And we laminated that to Dacron or aramid taffetas, taffetas being woven fabrics of really thin threads. So they have good stretch resistance because they're tightly woven. Next, they came up with, whoops, can you back me up? Sorry. Next, they came up with Mylar laminated to unidirectional materials, lowering the stretch even further by, instead of using woven taffetas, by using just threads laid onto the Mylar. And then finally, North in particular went to molded three-dimensional laminates and now molded three-dimensional membranes. One other, PBO is on the very left of that chart. That was rarely used. Actually, it's in a couple of the pictures at the start of this under roaches, et cetera, that red type material. It was very expensive and just didn't provide the boost that was expected out of it. So that went away pretty quickly. In addition, there's a ultra high molecular weight PE, which is a polyethylene and more commonly known to sailors as Spectre Dyneema. It's an aramid alternative with low stretch and great flex and UV properties, but it creeps. So again, we kind of come, other than the molded laminates, come full circle back to making out of carbon next. So here we have North membrane sail manufacturing at North 3DI. It uses what are called spread filament tapes. And so I'll put you to sleep further real quickly here by saying 3DI is composed of ultra-thin unidirectional spread filament tapes, pre-impregnated with thermoset adhesive, arranged in a complex multiple axis array and three-dimensionally molded into a one-piece flexible composite membrane with no mylar to delaminate. So what we're seeing here is a person over the mold. The mold, it looks like, already has its it gets heated and it gets vacuum formed. And so they may already be vacuum forming it here, and they just do some checks to make sure that the vacuum is going correctly, etc. The mold is shaped up to a size of some large yacht, to the airfoil shape and to the edge shaping that's going to be used on it. And in 3DI, now in a 3DL process, there would be a gantry over top of this, laying threads from corner to corner in different arrangements. With the 3DI, if you look at the lower left, we have these little gantries that lay up sections of the sail. They're flat sections, similar to, well, they are panels. And so it lays, if you look at the right, there's a tape layer over there. And so it's taking approximately 3-inch wide tapes that have all the threads flat, no overlap at all. And they are going out of the corner and in different parts of those panels in different directions, forming a panel. They then take those panels, put them onto that 3DI mold, and then they again use a heat and vacuum setting to form the sail and take it off and put the edges onto it. Next, back to the regular world. So we started with standard Dacron horizontal panels. Here where I'm saying we've come a long way. Egyptian cotton was our first material, and then Dacron was our first successful standard material, so to speak. And so the left-hand boat is Renegade. We've got 2-ply up the leech in order to hopefully limit stretch of those overlap pockets. There's only a couple of millimeters of seaming in each of those pockets. And if even a half a millimeter, quarter millimeter opens up at the leech, it becomes a different sail and it's not as fast. Over on the right, to combat problems with cross-cut panels, we went to radial type sails using laminates. And so there's a Yankee with a vertical cut to it. There's 3 vertical panels with 2 seams. And there's also a radial panel out of the Clue, which we don't use anymore. Now we just take those other 2 seams and put them right down to the foot. And so you can imagine that the shape is being put in where it's needed. There's shape of the luff, there's shape about 25% back, and then there's shape about 45-50% back. And so it's helping in a much better way to get the shape into the sail. Next. Here, let's see, essentially on the left, we have a one design Bemke B Skeeter sail with a traditional roach. So, we have a lot of one design boats that we've talked about out there, but the B Skeeters, in particular the Bemkes, have decided that they also want their sails to be excuse me, one design. And so a number of years ago, we came up with a design that's shown right here. It has pretty much the old standard roach that comes out at the top and sticks out a bit at the bottom. And now when they order a sail from me, we build to that same spec. And so they've got a one design boat and a one design spec and a relatively inexpensive sail since it's not carbon. On the right, we have 3 land sailor sails for Bill Dale, and they're made out of another material still called Cuban fiber, which was developed by Bill Koch for the America's Cup program that he did. And that could be compared to spread filaments in that it was laid up in panels on a stainless steel plate, I think, with all the threads side by side, and it was laid up by hand. And as far as I know, so you had all these nails across one side and across the other, and you literally just went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in order to have all these threads next to each other. It was very expensive, and so it's not used very much, but it helped him win an America's Cup, and it still has some places in the sailing world. So you can see 3 different roaches here. You've got on the bottom, pretty much a light wind sail with a lot of roach on the back to, let's say, you have, if you sailed it on ice, if you had a little bit of snow, and maybe on the playas that they have kind of wet conditions or something that may be slower than nice hard conditions. And so you might use that sail. There's an all-purpose roach in the middle, and then there's a, so to speak, storm sail on top. Next. Here's 3 sails of Dan's, I believe. They're a Pentex laminate, and we used, with the help of Dan, 3 different roaches. Go from a 12-inch head on the bottom with getting out to the maximum 12-inch roach at the second batten down, and then we go straight to the foot. In the middle one, we kind of average that out, still use the 12-inch head, but don't use much roach on it. And then we go down to about a 4.5-inch head and straight to the clue for a high wind sail. But Dan has found that if he's got decent ice, he can pretty much use the small sail, I believe, in any condition and be just as fast in light air, let's say, as using the light air sail on the bottom. Next. And here's a final look at a different leech. This is Tom Hislop, and he came to me, and I'd never done it before, but he wanted a sail that was a little hollow down low. So if you look at the middle diagram, that red line, which I wish was a little straighter, shows that about the 3rd to 4th battens up, the roach goes hollow, and then it comes back out to a, so to speak, maximum up near the top. And the idea behind that was that, similar to windsurfer sails, that it would help the top twist off as the wind picked up and not create too much drag in lower winds. On the right, we've got a little quiver of sails. On the bottom, the light blue, you've got the 12-inch head, and then pretty much straight down. In the middle, you've got the 4.5, 5-inch head with a little bit of roach, still maximum foot. But then on the 3rd one, we go down to a minimum foot, well, less foot, and the small head as a high-speed sail, so to speak. And so there's a lot of ideas out there. And here comes my last slide. Next. So you don't have to wait for ice to test sail designs. This is John Keck driving his pontoon boat, and Ed Knuth, both gurus of mine, who helped me tremendously in my DN ice boating. And so they said, when Norton came out with a new aluminum mast called the Norton Wing, which simply meant that it was the full 4 inches fore and aft, we went out in the fall and strapped this on, put a new sail on, and took pictures of how it bent and how things went. And it was helpful to do that before the season showed up and learn more about how the Norton Wing was bending. They also, before this, strapped one of the square boat Skeeters onto it, because they had these little aileron or gurney flaps on the back of the planks, and they wanted to measure the drag and the lift, so the down pressure and the drag created by them. But they almost tipped the pontoon boat over and ended that experiment. And thank you. Next. Next slide.
Okay, runners. Runners are the most important factor in racing. On a sailboat, the hull does not need to change because the water is water. Maybe flat, maybe rough, but always water. Likewise, air is air. There's either no wind, enough wind, or too much wind. So you have two sails to choose from usually, a flat sail for speed or a full sail for power. But the ice can be smooth and hard, or soft and slushy, or covered in snow. Even hard ice can be sticky if it's bitterly cold, or friction-free if it's covered with a film of water. Snow can fall wet, then freeze overnight, making it as stiff as styrofoam. So runners are the most important game day choice a pilot can make. Next. Most runners are made of 440C stainless steel. With a career in the medical industry, Tom Nichols discovered that the knives used to slice through human cadavers were made of 440C stainless. This material has the least coefficient of friction over ice and, when hardened, retains its edge the longest. New Jersey's John Larson made some DN runners with 440C, which immediately proved to be superior. Today, nearly all iceboat runners are made of 440C stainless steel. Next. Skeeter runners are typically 4 inches tall, 53 inches long, 1/4 to 1/2 inch thick. Some are as long as 66 inches. All have an edge between 85 degrees and 105 degrees. Sharper angles are for harder ice. Wider angles are for softer ice. Added to this equation is the rocker or flatness of the blade. The skipper who figures out which combination works best for that day's conditions has the best chance of winning. Here, New Jersey's Mark Peterson installs his slush runners as he expects the snow to melt in the warm sun throughout the day. Next. After picking the perfect runners for the condition, it's imperative they're parallel. Here, the rear blades are being checked with lineup plates. This is a framing square type of system that uses a string. Another method uses a gun scope. Next.
So next, the question becomes, now you've seen a lot about where we've been and where we are today. Where are we going in the future? And the answer is no one knows. We'll have to see. And that's the absolute best thing about an unlimited class like the Skeeter. It's limited only by your creativity. So this boat in front of us here was definitely not limited by creativity. So the theory on this is one of Bob Caw's boats, modern 28-foot mast and all modern stuff. Well, the front cockpit boat has a lot of weight up there. The rumble seater has a lot of drag with the pilot's head in the back. What happens if we go halfway in between? Well, let's build a boat and find out. And while that might not be the ultimate racing answer, it's admirable the effort that everyone involved in Skeeters has stuck into the quest for answers and the grand experiment. And it's the grand experiment based upon what? How many days of sailing per year? You know, based upon what data collection, right? So, and that's what makes it fun and exciting, is just the continual guessing. So next. So what's the future? I don't know. This is what they thought the future was in the 1930s, and they kind of got it right. We're sitting in bubbles today, not sailing stern steers, but you kind of got it right. Next. Here's a picture of what we thought the future was in the mid 60s. Again, this comes out of S. Calhoun Smith's book. And most of these futuristic details that have not been tried yet have now been tried, and some successful and some not so much. But you'll notice the canopy in this picture. So really fun. So that's from 1960s. So where are we headed? Where are we really headed in the future? Well, if we look at the next slide and look at what our friends on water have done with the America's Cup boats and with wings, just think about how far that they've come with the wing evolution and how much it's reinvigorated the sport and the technology that's been put into them. So very impressive. Next. The one thing with the wings though is they are not easy to handle, not easy to rig up. They're large. They really should be taken down at night, and so hopefully we don't see one quite this large on an ice boat, but you see that team of people there. So wings have their advantages and disadvantages. Next. So this is Chauncey Griggs' boat. Very successful wing boat, and briefly competed in the Skeeter class, very successfully with a 75 square foot wing. So you think about that 75 square foot wing, that's a true 75 square feet. Whereas the soft sailed Skeeters are sailing with sails and total rig area is much, much greater. So very short lived and eventually deemed illegal because it didn't have a sail. And so one of the short lived things to try to comply was to put a little, I think it was maybe 4-inch by 4-inch patch of sailcloth material with an official ISA stamp on it and attach it to the back of this thing. And that's really what led to the minimum 65 square foot that's enforced today, which effectively bans solid wings. But what does the future hold? We certainly don't know. Has it been brought up for vote? Absolutely, more than once. And will it be brought up again? I'm sure it certainly will. So is this in our future or not? We'll just have to see. The wing boats are somewhat different. The amount of load that goes through the hull and through the forestay is incredibly low. And it's because you don't have any sheeting load on it, basically. So it's just the side load on it. And these things will actually drive themselves forward to where some of them have to have backstays just to hold it from coming forward. So the load on the plank, on the hull, load on everything is much lower, which leads to lighter and cheaper construction methods. And you can build an effective wing using 1/8-inch plywood, cheap door skins. So is this the future? We don't know. Certainly not legal today within the Skeeter racing class. But the other thing to remember is and think about is how successful this has been in the land sailing arenas. And let me tell you what, there is nothing like sailing behind a wing boat. It only takes once to learn you don't want to sail behind a wing boat. It literally absorbs 100% of the energy that's in that wind, and there's nothing left over. Nothing left over so much that it can luff your sail and snap battens just following one of these things. The air is very, very disturbed. So it's impressive at how they march. It looks like almost straight up wind some days. So it's very, very impressive. And I've seen these things survive, nighttime windstorms of 40 miles an hour with the wing still up. I've seen a lot of people put up large wings like this by themselves with no help whatsoever, with a little ingenuity and a little winch. So is this the future? We don't really know. Next. There have certainly been some wing boats that have all the land speed records for sailing have been done with wing boats. This is Richard Jenkins. This record was 126 miles an hour and asymmetrical design. So it's designed to go fast, one direction only, and it could return to where it came from going the other way. It's just not going to go as fast. The Iron Duck has returned at over 80 miles an hour going the wrong way. But asymmetrical design. What's interesting to think about with these things is this one was designed so that the hull pointed directly into the apparent wind, not the direction of travel. So the hull literally went crooked down the desert, traveling so that the same direction as the apparent wind for minimal drag on the hull. And the other interesting thing about this boat is it was literally the same mold used for the wing and for the plank thing that comes out the side. So it's actually the same airfoil, same mold. Next. And then this past year's efforts, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen. This is the current new record holder, 138 miles an hour on the desert. So there's no question that wings are fast. They take a long time to get there, but incredibly fast and efficient. And are wings part of the future of ice boating? We don't know. But I can guarantee you that it'll probably be voted on again someday. So we'll just have to see if we stick with soft sails, or you can't predict the future. And that's the best thing about the Skeeter class. Next, this is one dream we hope does not come true. Another successful airfoil design is a twin skin mainsail, where the mast is basically a D shape and then has two sails, one off each corner of that D, that then come together at the leech. And this is by far, there's no question that this is the absolute perfect airfoil shape and would do great things for ice boats. But let's just hope this dream doesn't come true. The only one who wants this to come true is a sailmaker. But the complexity of trying to get this to work on an ice boat is, hopefully it's not worth it, and hopefully we don't go that direction. But if we do, I'll build one. Next. So as the evolution has gone on, the rigs get taller, the boats get longer, the boats get wider. We use lighter and more high-tech materials like carbon fiber, and as a result, the expense does go up. And it has started as a common man's sport and needs to be maintained as such, and the cost has gone up, but it's not something that's unattainable. There's people that you build equally fast boat with not as much money in materials or finishes. So there's lots of ways to be successful, but there's no question that over the years the fundamental investment cost of a brand new boat has gone up. But as the Skeeter fleet has gotten smaller, so has increased the amount of available used boats that can be had for quite a reasonable price. Next. Some people think the answer may be the direction that I've gone, which is the same high-tech platform and scaled down platform. So same solution, front cockpit boat in a bubble, carbon fiber foam mast, carbon fiber sail. So it's the exact same stuff, just everything smaller. So the Sea Skeeter, this one is my design. And it goes pretty good. And you line this thing up next to A Skeeters, and it'll be right there at the first top mark, because it accelerates like hell off the start line, but eventually gets passed up by the freight train and cannot keep up with an A Skeeter. But the performance is not that much drastically different, and the portability and perceived ease of entry is much better. This boat will go out pretty much. I follow other DNs around in Minnesota, and so easy setup, portable. By limiting the 20-foot mast, then the boat doesn't need to be that big or long, and the amount of composite that goes into it is about half of what goes into a Skeeter, and a little easier on your back. So is that the future? I don't know, but there's a few people building them. Next. One thing over the years is that the Skeeter fleets are definitely smaller today than they were in the past, and so lots of trophies up for grabs. So grab a hold of your dream, build a boat, buy a boat, come on out and race, and there's a trophy just waiting for you somewhere. Need more builders, need more pilots. And there's certainly it's the history is tremendous in the sport, and need more people in the class. Next. None of the people on this slide need any introduction. Every single one of these individuals has contributed more to the sport of ice boating than I can even possibly imagine in my head. All accomplished soft water sailors. A lot of the soft water accomplishments are what led to the Sailing Hall of Fame. But every single one of these individuals put more passion, effort, and hours into their ice boating career than the soft water career. And the other thing to think about when you think about all these individuals is that every single one of these people has extremely been gracious with their time and their talent and all their knowledge to truly grow the sport, grow the class, and be inclusive of everybody who wanted to participate. So incredible people. I words can't even begin to describe. Okay. And with that, we'll go on.
ahead, Jerry. Well, before we jump into questions, on behalf of the Four Lakes Ice Yacht Club, who sponsored this summit, and every one of us who has listened in on this session, huge thank you to Pat, Dan, and Henry. I'm sure all of you are like me and found this to be very entertaining, very informative, and a wonderful capture of the history of the Skeeter class. And now that it's been put on video and will be put up on YouTube, it will exist in perpetuity. So thank you very much for sharing your time, energy, and expertise. I do not believe that we have had any questions submitted. How about that? Okay, we have a question that has come in via chat. So I will pose that question. Can you show that to me again, Jerry? So the question is, how do bubble boat pilots gauge sail trim?
Come on, Dan, you first.
You told us the story, yeah.
Me first, okay. So when Buddy Melges sailed my bubble boat for the first time, he said, I never sailed a boat that accelerated like your boat. And in further discussion, what we discovered was sitting in front of the mast, you're not distracted by the rotation of the mast or the bend of the mast or the trim of the boom, or you're not distracted by anything. The only thing you have to go with is the seat of your pants feeling of accelerating. And you always steer the boat and trim the sail to feel the most acceleration. So it doesn't really accelerate more than any other boat. It's just the only thing you have to go by. I said in my presentation that these are the easiest boats to sail, and they really are. Once you get them up into fourth and fifth gear, you almost point them in any direction you want. It's intuitive. Pat, you might be able to elaborate on the trim.
Yeah, the amount of trim, I've forgotten how to sail. So the amount of trim is insanely small. My range on a 7-to-1 system at the winch end, my range of travel is about 4 inches. So how much is that really moving at the boom? It's less than an inch is my full range of travel. Everything that, and so basically we've made them into wings. That's all it is just a wing. And so what is the trimming doing? The trimming is affecting the last little bit of mast bend. It's affecting the last little bit of twist off at the top. But for all intents and purposes, we're sailing a wing. That's what it is. So the amount of trim is very small. The way we judge where we're going, seat of our pants, but also that telltale that's on the forestay is incredibly important. I operate with 3 telltales up there. So when the first one gets wrapped up, I still got 2 left. When the second one gets wrapped up, I've still got 1 left, because if there was no telltale on that forestay, I would have real problems. And I know where that needs to be in order to keep that wing flying. And and a note on that, these things, they won't even start on a broad reach. I could put it 90 degrees to the wind and push it all day long. It's not going to go anywhere unless there's a lot of wind, because it's fully stalled. So they're designed, that wing is designed, that you're forming with the mast and the sail is designed to fly at a certain angle. And that telltale tells us everything. And when it points straight back at me, then I know I better do something. So that's what I got.
Okay, another question. Can you describe more the reason for the change in design from the fastback rear section design? The reason for the change in design to the fastback rear section.
Well,
I'll just say, Pat, that two reasons for the fastback were it allows you a little bit more sail area that doesn't get measured in the formula, and it makes the back of the boat smaller, so it makes the back of the boat lighter because there's less frames in there and there's less fiberglass and decking wrapping the boat. But more than that, Pat, you explain.
yeah. So, for decades, we'd seal that boom to the deck, run that boom into the deck, seal it with foam rubber, do everything you can to seal that gap. And in a traditional rumble seater, if you didn't seal that gap and you took off your glove and put it next to the boom, it'd be like a jet of compressed air just shooting at your hand underneath that boom. And that's why it's so important to seal it to the deck, is to trap that air. So you put the cockpit in the front, and if you have a horizontal deck, it's still the same thing. You still need to seal that because we need to keep that air in, because that's a huge amount of loss. When you go to the fastback design, the other thing that starts to happen is, well, what direction is that air going along the sail? It's not truly horizontal. There's definitely a massive horizontal component to it. That's the apparent wind speed, right? But there's also that air is trying to escape underneath the boom. And so the air is trying to go downward as well. So if you combine the vector of the air going backwards mostly and downward a little bit, trying to get underneath that boom, the resultant of those two is about a 10-degree angle. And you can prove this by on the front cockpit boat, put a telltale down low or on the boom, and that telltale won't be straight back. It'll be downward at a 10-degree angle. And the reason why is that's the angle that the wind is actually going at that point. And so if you just match that, there you go. And so if with that downsloping angle, there's varying opinions on it. My opinion is that it's not nearly as important to try to seal that boom the last little bit anymore, because there's nothing trying to go that direction. It's staying in the sail. Comment on the leach dimension. On a 20-foot mast, I have a significantly longer leach than a B-Skeeter with a 24-foot mast. And so you think about all that power in a tiny little platform. So yeah, there's a lot more leach length there. Thank you.
So a somewhat related question, what is the typical all-up weight of an A-Skeeter?
So I'm guessing this is for memory, but they're basically around the 500-pound mark. There have been lighter boats, but as soon as there's any appreciable wind, you have to add weight to it. And in fact, we've gotten to the point with these Skeeters, by putting the skipper in front of the mast and taking the weight off the runner plank, they are prone to hike earlier than if the skipper was sitting behind the plank. So in wind that is enough to race and get you around a race course, most often you have to add weight to the boat. It was a rare situation where you'd race an A-Skeeter without putting some lead in the boat. And on a windy day, I've put as much as 125 pounds of lead in the back of the boat to keep the boat down on the ice and not sliding around.
The little sea Skeeter that I sail is between 375 pounds and 400 pounds by itself, all ready to go with runners and sail. I'm pretty heavy. But I start adding lead at about an 8 mile an hour breeze. Can you talk through a leeward mark rounding? No, I can only tell you how many times I've survived it. So most classes you count your laps. 1, 2, 3. We just count how many times we've survived the leeward mark rounding. The best way to talk about this is what was relayed to me, which is something I live by, is you want to keep that flag to the wind for the minimum amount of time. So setting up for the rounding is increasingly more DN style, where you're coming into that leeward mark, you're heading almost straight downwind for a big S curve. And by the time you hit the mark, you should be not quite as completed with your turn as a DN, but 3/4 of the way completed. So you're heading right back up the course. The boats will slide. The slide is perfectly controllable. It's like driving it's like driving a Camaro in a snowstorm. You can control exactly where the rear end is, and it's a whole lot of fun. So it's not the slide is not uncontrollable whatsoever with the front cockpit boats. We set up the balance. How much leeward helm should I have? Where should I have the center of effort? The best way to judge how you're doing at that is at your leeward mark rounding. And we say that when you got the boat set up properly with the correct balance and the correct runner angles, that all 3 runners should be sliding. If the front runner is not sliding, you've got the center of effort too far back, and vice versa. So all 3 runners should be sliding, but the steering runner is still plenty under control.
And
So, just to add
go
to
ahead,
that,
Dan.
you are going to slide at the leeward mark. No matter what you do, you can't prevent it. So oftentimes you try to exacerbate the slide and get the boat to spin around quicker so that the slide's over sooner and you can then start sailing upwind. But like Pat says, it's completely a controllable slide. It's a controlled power slide.
And since that question came from a noteworthy DN sailor, it really is quite opposite of what we're trying to do with the DNs to avoid any type of slide altogether. When you do it well, of course, as Matt will attest, the boat doesn't slide at all. You've entered wide, exited close, and you've maintained as much as the speed as you possibly can. When I first got my ride in a sea Skeeter, that was the biggest adjustment for me, was that reality that this thing is going to slide, and I just have to understand that's the case.
It's really disheartening when you go out there with a razor sharp set of runners and you're sliding around that mark and all you're thinking about are all those hours you spent on the runners. But it's a necessary evil. And which leads into the next question about sharpening. Now, a lot of Skeeter guys have a runner sharpening machine like DNs do, a long, thin belt sanding type machine. I never did that. I always had my runners originally done on an industrial grinding machine without the stiffeners on them. And then I used a hand stone and stoned all the grinding marks out. And every time I used the runners, I just re-stoned them. So for every day I sailed, I'd have to spend, 30 minutes on each runner, keeping the edge up. And my feeling was the machine put the edge on the runner perfectly. If I stuck that on a sanding machine, I was going to mess it up. There's human error. But if I just hand stoned the runners, I couldn't ever mess up that edge. So me personally, I only stoned my runners.
Maybe a couple more comments on that same subject about runner angles and how that's changed, especially with the front runner. So on the rumble seat, boats really didn't like to turn, really didn't like to turn. At the end of the rumble seat era, I was running a 80-degree runner on the front, and everybody ran just massive crown, just so much crown that was like a giant smile. so much crown that you had to put a little flat spot underneath where the chalk was. Otherwise, that thing would just sit up there and dance. You're doing everything possible in order to get that boat to just barely steer. And there's no weight up there, so there's no friction. With the front cockpit boats, there's a lot of weight up there, a whole lot of weight. And I certainly didn't understand that. And that's one of the ways to make the front cockpit boats go faster is I don't need that runner up there. I can get by with a flatter 100-degree runner, 105. I've thought about going to 110 on that front runner, and you still got enough steering power. So tremendous change over the years in that steering runner.
The next question Matt asks is about the height of the Hound. I never changed the height of the Hound. From the first carbon fiber mast we built in the late 1980s, we essentially put the Hound 2/3 of the way up. And if I needed to control mast bend, I did it building the mast, stiffening the mast in certain sections and softening it in others. But it never even occurred to me until I saw this question that moving the Hound up or down could change the performance of the boat. You, Pat?
2/3, we can't mess with that one. There've been people who have tried. There's a lot of desert boats that go lower, and it's really hard to control mast bend when you go lower. You go higher, the loads go up, and then you're getting into strength problems. So 2/3, I'm not moving from that. I insist it's absolutely the perfect number, and there's no reason to vary from that, in my opinion.
So Matt, I don't know if Daniel, I don't know if everybody on the podcast or whatever the Zoom call sees the questions, but Matt asked, are you allowed to adjust the side stay length while sailing? Now, that's something that I have done. What we do, DNs used to do it, but all the other ice boats do it, is you lengthen the side stays for the wind condition. The stronger the wind is, the more you lay the mast off to the side. And that's so the boat is controllable going upwind. If the side stays are too tight, the boat is very lively. It wants to just hike or slide. But if you let this mast out and slop over to the side a little bit, it depowers the rig and makes it a lot more controllable going upwind. But when you get to the upwind mark, now you're depowered a little bit. You'd like to have that side stay pulled in tight again. So the picture of the yellow boat, Magic, that had a 30-foot mast, that had an electric winch in it that would adjust the side stays while sailing. I could sail that boat upwind, laid off, and when I got to the upwind mark, I would pull the mast side to side vertical again, straight, and I would point downwind at least 10 degrees tighter than everybody else. It was so amazingly successful that night or that weekend at the ISA meeting, it got voted out as being illegal. I shouldn't have spanked everybody so much with it, and probably would have allowed it. But it did work.
That's an interesting question on the subject of, how many controls do you want? And, we've actually gone full circle. You think about ailerons on runner planks and mast rotation limiters and adjustable side stays, and then my last little experiment with the windward traveler. And it's just more stuff, and it doesn't make us a better fleet. And just having that one line and a set of foot pedals, that's the best ever. The other stuff, it's just more stuff, and it's an awful lot of stuff to think about in an awful short period of time as well. So even if you have it, you got to think about using it very quickly. So
There you go, Pat. You use 42-inch runners.
yeah, what is the optimum runner shape and how much flat? I can't quite see flat for 42-inch side runners. So little sea Skeeter, I run 42 to 44-inch side runners. I'm running the 008 crown of anywhere between 18 to 24 inches. The fleet has kind of gone, it's been interesting the last few years with some really competitive DN sailors in the Skeeter fleet, that they've actually gone back to really paying a lot of attention to rocker. And it's definitely paid off, especially in the guy in the video in front of you here.
Pat, how much of that flat is in front versus behind the bolt?
What I do when I push down is I'll find where is that pivot bolt, and then I'll draw a line at about 15 degrees forward. Where is that point on the runner? And that's where I'll put the pressure down, because I think that's what's actually happening, combination of downforce and friction. So I think that's what's actually happening. So that's where I'll push down, and from there it's 50-50.
There is one question that was submitted in advance that I'll now pose. And the question was, is it a good idea to start your ice sailing career in a Skeeter? An A Skeeter in particular?
So I can tell you, I started sailing iceboats when I was 11 years old, and I can't believe my dad wouldn't let me sail the big Skeeter till I was 16. And then he let me sail it. So can it be done? Yes. Would I highly recommend it? No, especially with the modern Skeeters, they're incredibly punishing. And the safest way to sail these boats is wide open as fast as they go. They don't have an option to reduce speed like a DN or a night. Just let the sail out and you'll go slower. We don't really have that option. If we let the sail out, the wing mast and sail will flog, and bad things happen from there. So we don't really have that ability to just let the sail out to make the boat go slower. And so you have to keep it wound up, top speed, literally all the time. And that's a pretty hard learning curve if you haven't sailed ice boats before. But the rapid progression from night to Skeeter, that can certainly happen very, very quickly. But I'm not sure you just climb in an A Skeeter without prior ice boat experience.
So Matt has posed a new question, somewhat related, that gets to strategic considerations when racing, considering the performance of the modern Skeeters. Yeah,
so these things do have long runners on them, and if we don't have a lot of runners, and so if the ice is super flat, tacking, you're losing speed. And it's just disheartening to listen to that boat come through the tack. It just the whole way around. So you got to be very careful. Is this tack worth it or not? Your momentum will be preserved, unlike a DN. But there is definitely a friction element to making a tack. So you've got to determine if that's in your best interest or not. If there's a shift, you're always better off to play that. You just can't play it 10 million times. But yes, absolutely play the shifts. How do you know if there's a shift? You're inside the bubble. And anybody who tells you that they know the difference between a shift and a lull, they're either way smarter than me, or maybe that's not quite the truth. The shift and the lull are extremely hard to tell apart. Dan, did you have thoughts on that?
You have to tack in the shift. The course is long. The boats are maneuverable. You won't feel the boat come to a stop when you tack. I mean, they're very. In fact, I tack in a shift. I'm also wondering, with Matt Struble asking so many questions, if he might be out in California building a Skeeter. Maybe he's going to join us.
He happens to have access to the Nissan Composite Lab, so if he is building, we should all be worried. Not only because of his talent, but because of his resources. Henry, don't make any sales for him, okay?
Okay.
Well, that being said, I just want to say that if anybody out there is considering building a Skeeter, just like our predecessors, Bill Mattson and Dave Roston and Paul Kruger and Pat and I and Henry, our phones we're available always to anybody for any kind of questions, and we hold no secrets. We'd be more than happy to help anybody that asks for it.
And likewise for, for sailing on, you see me out on the ice sailing. As long as you've got some degree of experience and we can find the right day. I've put a whole lot of people in the cockpit of my little Sea Skeeter, including just 2 weeks ago. So come on out, get involved one time around the windward mark, and your life will be changed forever.
And I'll add to this, and for those of us who don't have the technical skills that Pat and Dan do, or necessarily the same robust pioneering spirit, they've done so much work for us that for people like me and others, it's much easier to get in now. Down to CNC cut mast foam sections are available, so it's plug and play, and the layup schedules for doing a carbon fiber mast are provided to you, and the instructions that Pat or Dan will share with you are extremely thorough, even for inexperienced builders. So if you're inclined to do it and have the motivation, I can assure you that you have the resources and the support available. So jump in, you won't regret it. Okay, I think we're a little shy of 2 hours, so I think we'll call it a night. And once again, on behalf of the Four Lakes Ice Yacht Club, huge thank yous to Henry, Pat, and Dan. Thank you to everybody for their questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you all on the ice, and have a wonderful holiday season. Good night, everybody.